Which page? And just, when the time is right, turn it around and switches that up when it comes time for you to talk. Should go green. Thank you. We're in week 3 of a mini-series on prayer. And as we start, Jesus has a lot to say about how things are. But when it comes to what he calls his house, he doesn't call it a house of miracles, although miracles do take place in his house. He doesn't even call it a house of worship, although we've just been worshiping in his house. What Jesus calls his house is a house of prayer. It is one of the most significant and important things we will ever do on planet Earth. We've been talking about prayer over the last few weeks. About 3 weeks ago, Pastor Sean talked about how we should be praying first. We pray as a first resolve, not as a last resort. Last week, we talked about the prayer of Jabez, about praying on, blessing, influence, the presence of God, and protection. Man, if you walk with that on your life, you are walking blessed men, women, boys, girls. Today, we're looking about praying off. And the challenge we have, and this is why we've got Paige and Zoe helping. Paige and Zoe are today our ancient biblical research associates. The challenge of reading the Bible is that we are reading the Bible as 21st century human beings. And the saying is that we do not see things as they are. We see things as we are. If we pick up a Bible and we read our Bible, we may think, that's awesome, it speaks to me this way, in my context, forgetting that the Bible was written thousands of years ago to communities in a very different context, facing very different challenges. And when they would hear things for the first time, new Bible stories, for instance, they would be joining dots to things that had gone before. And if you would hear something that was a repeat of something before, words or themes or stories, you'd start to click. When the Bible repeats itself, it's really trying to tell me something. So when the Bible repeats itself, it's really trying to tell me something. So when the Bible repeats itself, it's really trying to tell me something. So when the Bible, you get the idea. We're going to 1 Samuel, chapter 1. We're going to read it in stages. It starts very simply. There was a certain man from Ramathaim, a Zuphite from the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. He had 2 wives. One was called Hannah, and the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. Lovely story. 2 wives, 1 husband, 1 has children, 1 has none. To a 21st century reader who's just hearing the story for the first time, we hear great story. It's a start. To an ancient listener, we are joining dots. Hold on. I know this story. I've heard it somewhere before. Paige, we've heard this somewhere before. I gave you a task of going to Genesis chapter 16. Who are the main characters in Genesis chapter 16?
Abraham and Sarai.
Yeah, cool. What is their problem?
Sarai can't have a child.
Okay. We have the same thing happening. There's a man and there's a woman, and childlessness is an issue. But there is also a blame problem. Who do they blame?
They blame the Lord.
They blame God. Yes, Sarai goes to Abraham and says, the Lord has kept me from having children. What is her solution?
For her servant to have the child.
So suddenly we have another woman in the mix. One man has 2 wives. And the problem is that one can't have children. But an ancient listener is thinking, no, I've heard this somewhere else. Zoe, You had a task, quite a different task, because this is quite a long story in Genesis 29 and 30. Who are the main characters in your story?
Leah and Rachel.
Yeah. Who's their husband?
Jacob.
Okay. So we've got one man. We've got two wives. And what is the problem? No cheeky messages from the front.
I need to remember which one is which. Rachel is jealous of Leah because Leah can have kids and she can't.
Right. And you picked up on another bit of jealousy as well, The other way around. What was Leah's jealousy?
Jacob loved Rachel.
Yes. One man, two wives. And what is Rachel's solution for her jealousy? So she's jealous of Leah because Leah can have kids. She can't. What's her solution?
She got her servant to get kids for her.
And who does she blame?
Jacob.
Yeah. One man, two wives. Different blame game. Yeah, it says, when Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she was jealous of her sister. She said to Jacob, "Give me children or I'll die." Thank you, my research associates. Great job. Give them a round of applause. So when we come to 1 Samuel chapter 1, we need to be thinking, hold on, I know this story. We've heard it before. It's happened. And I think I should know how this story is about to go. One man with two wives. We know how this happens, how this works. Here we go again. History repeats itself. But it's not just repetition of a story. There's repetition in the story. We're going to carry on from verse 3. It says, year after year, this man went up from his town to worship and sacrifice to the Lord Almighty at Shiloh, where Hophni and Phinehas, the two sons of Eli, were priests of the Lord. Whenever the day came for Elkanah to sacrifice, he would give portions of meat to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her, and the Lord had closed her womb. Because the Lord had closed Hannah's womb, her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. This went on year after year. Whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her till she wept and would not eat. Her husband Elkanah would say to her, "Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons?" There is repetition of a story, but then there is repetition in the story. There's a story within a story that repeats itself on repetition. Year after year, this same cycle happens. They show up at church, they worship, they sacrifice. Every year, when husband Elkanah gives out meat, the double portion goes to his wife because he loves her. But it serves to her, it's a reminder of what she does not have. The only reason she gets the double portion, aside from love, she does not have kids. It's a reminder of her lack. And year after year, the rival wife is winding her up. In church, who knew bad behavior can take place in the house of God? It's even possible, depending on the translation you read, that Elkanah asks his question year after year. He does his best, Elkanah. He really tries. Essentially, when he says, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? The currency of success in ancient Israel is children. He's got them. Why does she need to worry? The pressure is off. His line continues. I think he's trying to be a comfort. How many know that we do try? But there are some differences in this story. I think it hurts Hannah a lot more than it hurt Sarai or Rachel. They're all powerless. None of them, at the point in their stories that Paige and Zoe helped us out with, none of them can do anything about their situations yet. But Sarai, she schemes. Rachel complains and then schemes. Hannah, she just weeps. She's broken. And she doesn't have a plan B. She's not going for one. Maybe she knew what Pastor Sean was preaching about and thinking about the theme for this year. You know, Psalm 127 verse 1, unless the Lord builds a house, the workers labor in vain. If you ask Sarai, if the Lord doesn't build your house, build it yourself. If you ask Rachel, if the Lord doesn't build the house, build it yourself. If you ask Hannah, if God doesn't build the house, she's not pushing a plan B. And Sarai and Rachel, if God doesn't, I will. After all, God helps those who help themselves. It's not in the Bible, actually. But if God doesn't for Hannah, she won't. And this is what hurts her so bad. There is no other option. She won't scheme. She won't plan. She won't complain. She'll pray. I've been thinking about how to talk about things to pray off. We all come here with something. When the Bible repeats itself, it's really trying to tell us something. When the Bible repeats itself, it's really trying to tell us something. When your life starts to repeat itself, God's really trying to tell you something. When your life starts to repeat itself, God's really trying to tell you something. What in your life is repeating? Where are we going around the mountain once again? The same story happening, where we can't seem to get out. What are we doing yet again? Doing the same things and having the same things happen. What are we repeating? Because when your life repeats something, God is trying to speak. There's something to pray off. And so Hannah prays. Pay attention to the details of what the writer chooses to mention here. Once, when they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli the priest was sitting on his chair by the doorpost of the Lord's house. In her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly. The details matter. Hannah gets up. Eli sits down. Hannah is active. Eli is passive. Hannah, with actually low social status, mocked within her family and looked down upon by her community for her lack, is the one who takes the initiative. Eli, the priest, the one with a position, the one with status, just watches as the world goes by. And Hannah is desperate enough to talk to God that she don't care. She wants one person's attention, and it's not the priest's. If we're going to pray something off, how desperate are we? I say this from personal experience. You can get really comfortable going around the mountain, saying, I really don't like the same old thing over and over and over again. Actually start to sort of enjoy it or sort of get used to it. Kind of better the devil you know than the devil you don't know. How desperate are we to break out of the story that is repeating itself? Hannah is desperate. She stands and she changes position. She hasn't changed her posture. She is weeping, she is broken, she is in anguish. But she's changed her position. At the end of this message, there'll be time to respond. And this is partly what this place is for. There's nothing particularly anointed about the front row. But if nothing else, change your position. Sometimes that can feel like it's all we can do. My posture isn't changing, but at least I can change my position. Verse 11, and she made a vow, saying, Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. It sounds like a classic kind of immature bargaining technique. Give me what I want, and I'll give you. I'm sure many people pray that over the lottery every week. Yeah, come on, God, come on through. Think of the tithe. Except if Hannah was praying that prayer, it's not, God, come on through, think of the tithe. It's no, if you give me, I don't even know what the jackpot is, but it's all yours. Which I don't think many people are praying that if I win the lottery, God, it's all yours. I'm sure people are thinking, I'll pay the mortgage off, I'll do this, that, and the other, and I'll give you a little bit. It's not an immature bargaining technique from Hannah to God. There's a lot more going on. Ancient listeners would know. And this is part of the hard work that we have to do. There is a context to 1 Samuel, and the context is Judges. 1 Samuel starts where the kind of book of Judges ends. And at the end of the book of Judges, we're told that in those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. The context for 1 Samuel is a broken nation, corrupt, messed up. The priest Eli and his sons, and there's a lot of bad news on them later on, who should be leading the way in representing the people to God and God to the people, are not doing their job right. It's a broken society. And Hannah gets up to take a stand for the thing that she desires, a son. But it's not just a son for her sake. It's that in the middle of a society that is broken, she is taking a stand for God. That what she has and who she is given will be devoted to God. She's actually taking an incredibly lonely stance. We're in a very blessed position. I mean, I heard earlier this week that in the census that for the first time in New Zealand, the majority of people are not Christians or have not labeled themselves as Christians. We've still got a lot of us. Imagine if it's just you. Hannah is taking that stand. That in the middle of this community, this society, this nation, that where everyone does as they see fit, I will choose this day who I and everyone God gives me will serve, and it will be the Lord. What she is praying has implications far beyond personal satisfaction. And when it comes to things to pray off, when we're praying off the cycle of going round the mountain once again, the implications are far greater than personal growth. Wayne and I have had the privilege of together we've been doing the last 10 weeks, the Valiant Man course, which is a 10-week course that is around discipleship around men and how they think of sexuality and marriage and how we relate to our wives. And the end goal, I guess, is that just as Lorraine does some incredible work working with the women in our church who are dealing with hurt and pain in various areas of life, that Wayne and I would be available to help the guys working out areas that are places of hurt and pain, which often men are a bit more reluctant to talk about. But we were in an environment for 10 weeks where we were talking about it. And we were with a whole bunch of guys, most of them from Australia, who were talking about it. And it is really breaking hearing the stories of why guys, it's not just that guys have struggled treating their wives a certain way or behaving a certain way. It's what brought them to that point and the damage that was done. It is really, really heartbreaking. But they're taking a stand now. And they're in the fight. And they're committed to it. Because they realize what we were reminded throughout the course, that what we're going through has far bigger ramifications and implications than just our personal growth. There are wives, there are children, there are churches, there are communities that stand to be blessed if we can commit to the battle and take a stand in prayer for what needs to be prayed off. This is far more important than just my stuff and my journey. Hannah's prayer is not a prayer just for personal satisfaction or personal need fulfillment. It's a prayer that will change the world. We're still talking about them thousands of years later. The stakes are far too high for us not to pray. Verse 12 to 18. As she kept on praying to the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Eli thought she was drunk. Said to her, "How long are you going to stay drunk? Put away your wine." "Not so, my lord," Hannah replied. "I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying here out of my great anguish and grief." Eli answered, "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him." She said, "May your servant find favor in your eyes." Then she went her way and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. 1 Samuel is a book where things are not quite as they appear. We have this story that repeats previous stories, but suddenly goes a different direction, with a woman who does not offer a plan B. Her plan A is God, and that's all there is to it. We have a priest who should be on duty, sitting watching as the woman with no status comes in to worship and pray. And he watches and he sees drunkenness. He thinks that she's been pouring the wine in. She's been pouring her soul out. He thinks she's been misbehaving and up to no good. She's just praying with more than words. We've been learning in youth what it is to love God with your heart and with your soul. And we've been talking to the guys at youth, and Paige and Zoe and Chloe and others will know that when the Bible talks about the heart, it's talking about the place of your desires and your thoughts, your emotions and your decision making. When it talks about your soul, it's not talking about this kind of ancient Greek idea of this immaterial part of you inside yourself somewhere. Essentially, when it talks about your soul, it's talking about yourself, all of you. So when Hannah says, I was pouring out my soul to the Lord, she's saying, I was pouring out myself, all of me. She's all in. And when Samuel is reminded by God later in his life that the Lord does not look at the things people look at, people look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. He's not just being reminded of his job to see beyond what he sees. He's being reminded of his heritage as he saw his mum's heart, as she prayed off her barrenness. And he sees our hearts too. So, when the Bible repeats itself, as the worship team come, it's really trying to tell us something. When your life repeats itself, God is really trying to tell us something. It's time to pray off what has been repeating. Where have we gone around the mountain a few too many times? It's time to change position. It's time to take a stand. And it's time to pour ourselves out. And this is where the challenge comes. We are going to open the altar